I heard his laugh echoing through the empty house that morning, and my stomach dropped the same way it did when I realized I couldn't feel my legs after a car accident in the shop. That cold, calculating moment where your body knows something terrible has just happened before your brain catches up. "Well, look who's back," Marcus said, leaning against the kitchen counter with that smirk I used to find charming. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday in July, the kind of morning where the heat already hung heavy and thick before the sun even cleared the trees. I was standing in our driveway, holding a garbage bag with most of my clothes, having spent the night at a Motel 6 off Route 9 after he'd thrown me out. He was still in his boxers, dark hair messy, looking like he'd just rolled out of bed. Behind him, through the kitchen window, I could see the house we'd bought together 5 years ago, the Craftsman with the wraparound porch in Riverside, Connecticut, the one we'd spent every weekend fixing up, the pale blue shutters I'd insisted on, the garden bed where Diesel, our rescue mutt, had dug up my tulip bulbs last spring. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there in the driveway, sweat already pooling at the base of my neck, trying to process how we'd gone from him kissing me goodbye on Thursday morning before I headed to the shop to this. Let me back up, because this didn't start the night before, even though that's when everything fell apart. I'm Ashley Sinclair, 33 years old, and I've been rebuilding engines since I was 19. My hands know how to strip a transmission in the dark, how to feel when a gasket's starting to go, how to coax life back into machines that most people would have sent to the junkyard. It's the one thing in my life I've always been sure about. Growing up, my old man fixed cars in his garage, and by the time I was old enough to hold a wrench, I knew I wanted to do the same thing. Took every shop class I could, got my ASE certification at 22, and opened Sinclair Auto Repair with my best friend Kayla in 2019, just after I turned 29. That's also the year I met Marcus. He came in one Saturday afternoon with a transmission problem in his BMW, a silver 335i that purred like it had never seen a day of real work. Marcus was a financial advisor, 35, with the kind of clean hands that had never touched anything that would leave a permanent stain. He was charming, attentive, the type of guy who remembered details you'd mentioned in passing. When I told him the transmission rebuild would take 2 weeks, he started coming by the shop to take me to lunch. By October, we were serious. By December, he was talking about moving in together. 5 years of that. 5 years of him telling me I was brilliant. 5 years of him meeting my parents, of spending Thanksgiving at his mother's house in Greenwich, of him helping me paint the bedroom in our house, him being terrible at it and getting paint in his hair, both of us laughing so hard we could barely breathe. 5 years of planning a life that felt solid, real, like something I'd actually built instead of inherited or stumbled into. I loved him. Or I thought I did. Kayla had warned me, once, maybe a year into dating Marcus. We were closing up the shop on a Friday night, and she said something about how he seemed a little too smooth, a little too practiced at remembering the things he needed to remember. I told her she was being paranoid, that not every guy was going to disappoint her the way Brad had. That was unfair, I know. Kayla had been burned by her ex-husband, and she saw danger everywhere. I thought I was being smarter, more trusting, more evolved. I was stupid. The first real crack came about 6 months ago in January. Marcus had always handled our finances. He insisted on it, said it made sense given his expertise, and honestly, I was happy to let him. I was busy at the shop, and finances had never been my thing. But in January, I got a notification on my phone about a credit card I didn't recognize. When I asked him about it, he got defensive. "It's just something I opened for business purposes," he'd said, but he wouldn't show me the statements. "You don't need to worry about it, Ash. Trust me." I did trust him. That was the problem. Then, 3 weeks ago, his best friend Ethan came by the house unexpectedly. I was working a Saturday, so Marcus was home alone. When I got back around 6, I found them in the kitchen, and the conversation stopped cold the moment I walked in. Marcus's face did this thing, a micro-expression, I think they call it, where something flickered across his features and then vanished. Ethan suddenly found the refrigerator very interesting. "What's going on?" I asked. "Nothing," Marcus said too quickly. "Ethan just stopped by. We were catching up." Ethan left 10 minutes later without eating or staying, which was weird because he always stayed for dinner. That night, Marcus was distant. He said he was tired, went to bed early. I lay there listening to him pretend to sleep, feeling that creeping cold that comes when you realize someone's lying to you and you don't yet know why. The next morning, I did something I'm not proud of. While he was in the shower, I grabbed his phone. I knew his password. He'd never thought to change it after we moved in together. My hands were shaking as I opened his email. I found the first document about halfway down his inbox. It was a mortgage application for a different house, with his signature and what looked like my signature, except I'd never signed it. My hands literally went numb. I couldn't feel the phone in my grip. I stood there in our bedroom, the morning light streaming through the window, and I couldn't make my lungs work properly. There were more. A home equity line of credit, a second mortgage, all with forged documents, all with my name on them. He'd taken out $470,000 against our house without my knowledge. When he came out of the bathroom, he took one look at my face and knew. "Ashley, don't," I said. What happened next happened very fast. He tried to explain that it was temporary, that he'd made some bad investments and needed liquidity, that he was going to fix it before I ever found out. He grabbed my arm. I pulled away. He grabbed harder and pushed me toward the bed, not violently, but with this panicked strength that scared me more than anger would have. Diesel, our rescue dog, a scraggly pit bull mix with one ear that didn't stand up quite right, the kind of dog that nobody else wanted, started barking. He'd been a shelter dog for 3 years before we adopted him, and he didn't like people being grabbed or pushed. Marcus let go of me. That's when everything went bad in a different way. He looked at me like I'd betrayed him by bringing a dog into the house that might bite him, like I was the unreasonable one, like my being upset about him forging my signature on $500,000 in debt was somehow the problem. "You're being hysterical," he said. "Let me explain." I told him to get out of my way. I went downstairs and called Kayla. She was at the house in 20 minutes. The moment she walked in and I told her what I'd found, she said 3 words I'll never forget. "We need witnesses." She called our lawyer, family friend, someone she'd used for her divorce, and told him to meet us at the house. Then she stood there in the kitchen while I printed out every single email, every forged document, every piece of evidence. Marcus tried to argue with her, to convince her he could explain, that I'd misunderstood. She didn't say much. She just stood there with her arms crossed, giving him a look that said she'd seen this movie before, and she wasn't going to let me be the punchline. By the time the lawyer arrived, Marcus had gone quiet. He sat in the living room while we all met in the kitchen, and he didn't say a word. The lawyer, a woman named Susan Chen, looked through the documents for about 5 minutes. Then she looked at me and said, "These are felonies. We need to file a police report." That's when Marcus lost it. He stood up, started yelling that I was ungrateful, that he'd given me everything, that the marriage was over. He told me to get out. He actually said those words, "Get out of my house." It wasn't his house. We both owned it, but I was so shocked, so off balance, that I just stood there. Kayla grabbed my arm. "Let's go," she said. "We'll sort this out." But I couldn't move. I was looking at my husband, or the person I thought was my husband, and I couldn't recognize him. It was like looking at someone you know very well and realizing they're a perfect stranger. "I'm serious," Marcus said, his voice getting colder. "Get out. Take the dog. Get out now." Susan said we should leave, that we had enough, that we'd be in touch. So I grabbed Diesel's leash, threw some clothes into a garbage bag, and Kayla drove me to the Motel 6. I didn't sleep. I lay on a bed that smelled like industrial cleaner and someone else's despair. Diesel curled up against my legs, and I tried to figure out how my life had become this. How I'd missed something this big. How someone could wake up next to you for 5 years and systematically destroy you. By morning, my anger had curdled into something worse. Curiosity. I wanted to know what he was doing. I wanted to see if he was panicking, so I drove back to the house, thinking he'd be at work, or that maybe he'd calm down overnight and we could talk like adults. Instead, he was in the kitchen in his boxers making coffee, and when he saw me standing in the driveway, he laughed. "Well, look who's back." That's when I understood something that would define everything that came next. Marcus didn't think he'd done anything wrong. He thought I was the problem, and he had absolutely no idea what was coming for him. I stood there in the driveway, sweat pooling at the base of my neck, and something inside me crystallized. That laugh. That casual, dismissive laugh, like I was a joke he'd already forgotten he'd made, like throwing your wife out at midnight and then finding her standing in the driveway 9 hours later, was the kind of thing that happened in sitcoms, not real life. "Did you sleep?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to me, flat and distant. "Like a baby," he said, turning back to his coffee. "You?" I didn't answer. I walked into the house, our house, the one with my name on the deed, and Diesel followed me, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor. The kitchen smelled like him, the expensive cologne he wore, the same brand since I'd known him. Everything looked exactly the same as it had on Friday morning. The coffee maker still had the stain from when I'd spilled grounds 3 days ago. The granite countertop was clean, normal, like I hadn't just discovered he'd committed fraud in our marriage. "I need to talk to you," I said. "About what? About you overreacting to a business decision?" "Ashley," I explained everything to Susan. "It's complicated, but—" "You forged my signature." He set down his coffee mug carefully, too carefully. "Let's not do this right now. You're upset. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months," I said. "I want you out of this house. By tonight." He actually laughed again. "This is my house too, and you're not in any position to be making demands. You threw a fit, you overreacted, and now you're going to apologize and we're going to move forward like adults." That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop all over again. He genuinely believed he'd done nothing wrong. In his mind, the forged documents were a minor financial misstep, and my finding them was the betrayal. I turned around and left, drove straight to Susan Chen's office. She worked out of a small practice in downtown Stamford, a 15-minute drive from our house. I'd only met her that one time when Kayla called her over, but something about her had stuck with me. The way she'd looked at those forged documents, the absolute certainty in her voice when she said the word felonies. I called from my car and got lucky. She had a cancellation at 11. The office was exactly what you'd expect: beige walls, a receptionist who smiled without making eye contact, and a corner office with a view of the parking lot. Susan was maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and glasses on a chain around her neck. She was wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my weekly paycheck. "Ashley," she said, standing up to shake my hand, "Kayla mentioned you might reach out. How are you holding up?" "He's acting like nothing happened," I said. I sat down without being invited. "He's acting like I'm the one being unreasonable." Susan nodded slowly. She picked up a pen and started making notes. "Tell me everything that's happened since Saturday morning." So I did. I told her about him laughing when I came back, about him insisting it was his house too, about the absolute disconnect between what he'd done and how he thought about it. She listened without interrupting, just writing things down in neat, precise handwriting. When I finished, she set down her pen. "Ashley, I need to be honest with you about what we're dealing with," she said. "The documents you found, the mortgage applications, the home equity line of credit, those are federal crimes. Bank fraud, forgery of documents. This isn't a divorce issue. This is a criminal issue." "I know," I said, "but I don't want to press charges. I just want him out of the house, and I want to figure out what he did with the money." Susan took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "That's understandable, but you need to understand something. If you don't report this, he's going to know you found out, and he's still willing to work with him. And he's going to keep going. People like Marcus don't stop because they're caught. They stop because there are consequences." "What do you mean, people like Marcus?" "Men who believe the rules don't apply to them," she said. "Men who are charming and intelligent and convinced that their intelligence gives them permission to do things other people can't." He probably tells himself a story about why this was necessary, why it was justified. In his mind, he's not a criminal. He's just someone who took a calculated risk. I thought about that while she pulled up her computer and started typing. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. "First, we file a police report. I'll help you with that. Second, we file for a protective order if necessary, though given that he's not physically threatening you, a judge might not grounds, but we can try. Third, we get you completely separated from him legally. We file for divorce, and we do it in a way that protects your assets and your interests. He's my husband, I said. The words felt absurd in my mouth. He's someone who committed crimes, Susan said, not unkindly. And right now, you're still married to him, which means you're liable for some of what he's done. We need to change that. The police report took 3 hours. I had to sit in a conference room at the Riverside Police Department and explain to a detective named Morrison, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense manner, exactly what had happened. I printed out every document. I showed her the emails. I gave her the timeline. Detective Morrison listened, took notes, and when I was done, she said, "We're going to need to talk to him, but I'd recommend having your lawyer present when we do." "Is that normal?" I asked. "It's smart," she said. By the time I left the police station, it was nearly 4 in the afternoon. I had exactly 2 hours before Marcus came home from wherever he'd been. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't be in that house with him. I called Kayla. "Where are you?" she asked, before I'd even said hello. "Police station. I filed a report." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't go home." But I did go home. Not inside, but I parked across the street and watched the house, watched for his car. I needed to see what he did when he found out, needed to understand if he was going to run or fight or what. Diesel was in the car with me, pressed against my leg, and I kept my hand on his head because it was the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. Marcus's BMW pulled into the driveway at 5:47 p.m. He got out of the car with a grocery bag in one hand, like he was planning to cook dinner, like this was a normal Thursday evening. He went inside. 2 minutes later, he came back out. I could see it from across the street, that moment when he realized something was wrong. He stood on the porch, very still, and then he got back in his car and drove away. My phone rang at 6:15 p.m. It was Susan. "The police contacted him," she said. "They want him to come in for questioning tomorrow morning. He's called a lawyer." "Already?" I felt something twist in my chest. "He's intelligent, which unfortunately makes him dangerous. He knows this is serious, and now he's going to start protecting himself. That means he might start moving money, transferring assets, trying to hide evidence. We need to move faster." Kayla arrived at the house just as the sun was going down. She pulled up behind my car, got out, and didn't say anything, just opened the passenger door and got in. "You look like hell," she said. "I feel worse." "We need to talk about custody of Diesel," Kayla said. I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if Marcus is going to be charged with crimes, there's going to be a lot of legal maneuvering. He might try to use Diesel against you, claim you abandoned him, or that you're unfit, something to give himself leverage. We should get Diesel officially registered to you, get vet records in your name, all of it." I hadn't even thought of that. I'd been so focused on the mortgage fraud that I hadn't considered he might come at me from a different angle. "I'll call Susan," I said. "You should also think about where you're going to live," Kayla said. "You can't stay at the Motel 6 forever, and you can't stay in that house with him." She was right. Everything was moving so fast that I hadn't caught up to my own life yet. 24 hours ago, I was married. I had a house. I had a future I thought I understood. Now I had a garbage bag of clothes, a dog, and a growing understanding that the man I'd married had been lying to me for months, maybe longer. "My mom has a guest house," Kayla said, "out in Wallingford. It's small, but it's yours if you need it." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "We're going to get through this, and that bastard is going to pay for what he did." But as we sat there watching the house, my house, his house, our house, nobody's house, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst part wasn't over yet. We were just at the beginning of understanding what Marcus had actually done, and I had a terrible, creeping suspicion that the $470,000 was only part of it. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Detective Morrison. We need to talk about some additional accounts we found. Can you come back in tomorrow morning? I showed the message to Kayla. She looked at me, and her expression shifted from supportive to something harder, something angrier. How much did he take? She asked. I didn't answer because I didn't know, but I was about to find out. I was back at the police station by 8 the next morning, and this time, Detective Morrison had a folder that was twice as thick as the one from the day before. We found more, she said, sliding it across the metal table. We were in a different room this time, smaller, colder, with the kind of lighting that made everything look worse than it already was. A lot more. I opened the folder. My hands were shaking. There were statements from 3 different banks, accounts I'd never heard of, credit cards opened in my name without my signature, a second home equity line of credit, another mortgage application, and underneath all of that, a spreadsheet, handwritten, in Marcus's neat accountant's handwriting, that listed every single transaction. The total was $1.2 million, not $470,000, $1.2 million. I couldn't breathe properly. The room tilted. Detective Morrison pushed a cup of water toward me, and I knocked it over. How is that possible? I managed to say. How did the banks not catch this? Because he knew what he was doing, Morrison said. She was a professional, but I could see something like anger in her eyes. He's a financial advisor. He knew how to make it look legitimate. He knew which documents to forge, which signatures to copy. He knew the systems. What was he using the money for? I asked. Morrison exchanged a look with another detective, a younger guy named Rodriguez, who'd been sitting silently in the corner. Rodriguez opened a second folder. That's the interesting part, he said. We've traced most of the money. Some of it went to credit card debt, his personal credit card debt, not yours. But a significant portion went to a woman named Jennifer Carlisle. My stomach dropped. Who is Jennifer Carlisle? I asked, even though I already knew. I didn't know her name, but I knew who she was. She owns a boutique fitness studio in Stamford, Rodriguez said. He slid a photograph across the table. She was blonde, maybe 30, with the kind of sculpted look that comes from spending 4 hours a day in a gym. They've been in contact for at least 2 years. Text messages, email, hotel receipts. As far as we can tell, your husband has been funding her business with stolen money. I stared at her face. I didn't recognize her. That was somehow worse than if I had. How much? I asked. $740,000, Morrison said, deposited directly into her business account. I stood up. I needed to move, needed to get out of that room before I threw up on the detective's shoes. I need to go, I said. We're not done, Morrison said, not unkindly. We need you to verify some of this, and we need you to understand what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next is he's going to prison, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. That's likely, Rodriguez said. But first, he's going to lawyer up, and he's going to try to minimize the damage. He's going to claim duress, or that he was mentally ill, or that you were somehow complicit. People like him always try to share the blame. I called Susan Chen from the parking lot. She told me to come straight to her office, not to go to the house, not to contact Marcus in any way. I drove past our house anyway. His BMW was in the driveway. The house looked exactly the same, the pale blue shutters, the wraparound porch, the garden bed where Diesel had dug up my tulips. It looked like a crime scene, except there was no police tape, no evidence of anything wrong at all. Just a house, just a man inside it who'd been stealing my future while I worked 12-hour shifts at the shop. Susan's office was already busy when I got there. She had her paralegal pulling documents, and when I walked in, she stood up and closed her office door. The police contacted me, she said. Marcus's lawyer contacted me first, actually. He's trying to negotiate. Negotiate what? I asked. He committed federal crimes. He's claiming the mortgage applications were a misunderstanding, that the forged signatures were done without criminal intent, that he was going to fix everything, Susan said. She was reading from notes. He's offering to repay the money if you agree not to press charges. He can't repay money he doesn't have, I said, and he's already spent it on his girlfriend. Susan looked up from her notes. His what? I told her about Jennifer Carlisle, about the $740,000, about the hotel receipts and the text messages. Susan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the room. It was the look of a lawyer who just realized her client's case had gone from difficult to extremely straightforward. "That changes things," she said. She picked up her phone and called Detective Morrison. I could only hear Susan's side of the conversation, but it was enough. She was telling the police that Marcus had been engaging in an ongoing fraud to fund an affair, that there was a second victim who'd received stolen money, that any negotiation was off the table. When she hung up, she looked at me. "Here's what's going to happen," Susan said. "The police are going to arrest him today. They're going to charge him with bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. His lawyer is going to argue for bail, and the judge is probably going to grant it. But we're going to oppose it, and we're going to present evidence of the affair and the money trail. Then we file for divorce, and we do it in a way that gives you every protection the law allows." "What about the house?" I asked. "The house is in both your names," Susan said. "Once the divorce is filed, we can ask for an emergency order that forces him to move out. We can argue that you need to maintain stability, especially given that you've already been forced to leave once. A judge will almost certainly grant that." "And the money?" "That's going to be complicated," Susan said. "Some of it might be recoverable through restitution. Some of it might be lost. But the house, your retirement accounts, your business, all of that can be protected. We're going to make sure you come out of this with what's legally yours." It sounded good in theory. In practice, it sounded impossible. Marcus was arrested at his office at 2 in the afternoon. I found out because Kayla texted me a link to the Riverside Police Department's Facebook page, where they'd posted a brief statement about the arrest of a local financial advisor on federal charges. No names, but it didn't matter. By 3 o'clock, my phone was ringing with reporters trying to get a statement. I ignored all of them. What I did instead was go to the gym. Not to work out. I didn't have the energy for that. I went to find Jennifer Carlisle's boutique fitness studio, the one that had been funded by my stolen money. It was called Burn, and it was in a trendy part of Stamford, in a converted warehouse with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. I stood outside for 10 minutes, looking through the glass at the people on the treadmills and the bikes, at the instructors in their matching black outfits, at the whole carefully constructed world that Marcus had paid for with my signature. I didn't go in. I called Susan instead. "I found the studio," I said. "What can I do about it?" "Nothing right now," Susan said, "but the police will be contacting her. Once they realize she's been knowingly accepting stolen money, she's going to have her own legal problems." "So she didn't know?" I asked. "I don't know," Susan said, "but it doesn't matter legally. Knowingly accepting stolen money is still a crime." I drove back to Kayla's mother's house in Wallingford, where I'd been staying. Diesel was waiting for me on the porch, and I sat down next to him and tried to figure out how to feel about any of this. Marcus had stolen $1.2 million. He'd done it systematically, methodically, with the kind of intelligence and planning that could have built something good. Instead, he'd used it to fund an affair with a woman he'd met at a networking event 2 years ago, according to the police report. He'd been leading a double life, coming home to me, kissing me goodbye in the morning, all while funneling money to her business. The worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was that I'd trusted him with everything, and he'd looked me in the eye every single day and lied. The bail hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. I didn't want to go, but Susan said I should be there, that my presence would matter to the judge. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Marcus was wearing a suit. His lawyer must have insisted on it, and he looked almost normal, almost like the man I'd married. He didn't look at me when I came in. His lawyer, a man named Gerald Hoffman, with the kind of expensive haircut that screamed, "I charge $500 an hour," argued that Marcus was a pillar of the community with no prior criminal history, that he was a flight risk only if you assumed he was guilty, that the charges were overblown, and that he had every intention of cooperating with the investigation. The prosecutor, a woman named Amanda Kim, who looked like she'd heard this speech 100 times before, countered by presenting the evidence, the forged documents, the money trail, the affair. The fact that Marcus had already hired a lawyer before the police had even finished their investigation, suggesting consciousness of guilt. Then Susan stood up. "Your Honor, I'm representing the defendant's wife in a separate civil matter," she said. "I want to present one additional piece of evidence that I think is relevant to the question of bail." The judge nodded. Susan pulled up a document on the courtroom's screen. It was an email from Marcus to Jennifer Carlisle, dated 4 days ago, after the police report had been filed, after he knew he was being investigated. "I'll handle everything," the email read. "Don't worry about the business. I'm going to tell her I was mentally unstable. She'll believe it. She always does." The courtroom went very quiet. "This email suggests premeditation regarding his defense strategy and an intent to manipulate his wife," Susan said. "It also suggests consciousness of guilt and a willingness to lie under oath. Given this evidence, the defendant presents a significant risk to the integrity of the investigation." The judge didn't take long to decide. No bail. Marcus was remanded into custody pending trial. I watched them lead him out of the courtroom. He finally looked at me, and for just a second, I saw something in his face that I recognized. Not the charming man I'd married, but the person he actually was. Someone calculating. Someone who'd already moved on to figuring out how to minimize his own damage. The divorce was filed 2 weeks later. Marcus's lawyer tried to argue for a settlement that would have left him with half of the house equity, money he'd stolen. But the judge wasn't having it. Once the criminal case proceeded, once it became clear that the money he'd used to buy the house was partially fraudulent, the whole thing became complicated in a way that actually worked in my favor. Susan negotiated aggressively. She argued that I'd been the victim of identity theft, that I'd been coerced into the marriage under false pretenses, that I deserved full custody of our assets to protect myself from future fraud. She presented evidence of my financial responsibility, my business success, my good faith efforts to pay the mortgage while Marcus had been stealing from the banks. By the time we went to court for the divorce hearing, Marcus's lawyer knew he was fighting a losing battle. The judge awarded me the house, full custody of Diesel, and a settlement that included my retirement accounts and my half of the business equity. Marcus was left with a court-ordered payment plan to repay what he could of the stolen money, though most of it would go to the banks and the government, not to me. The criminal trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended most of it, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching my husband get convicted on 5 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of bank fraud, 2 counts of identity theft, and 1 count of forgery. The prosecutor laid out the evidence so methodically, so thoroughly, that there was never any doubt. Marcus had done exactly what he'd been accused of doing. His sentence was 7 years in federal prison. I remember the moment the judge said it. 7 years. And I felt something that I wasn't expecting. Not satisfaction, but emptiness. Because all the prison time in the world wasn't going to give me back the 5 years I'd wasted on him. It wasn't going to fix the fact that I'd been stupid enough to marry someone who could look me in the eye and lie every single day. The day after sentencing, I went back to the shop. Kayla had been running it mostly on her own, with help from our 2 other mechanics, and she'd done a better job than I could have expected.